Today, I want to share a story that's close to my heart. Sometimes, when loneliness is all we feel, the presence of someone or something loyal can be enough to get us through. Have you ever had a pet who became more than just a companion? Perhaps even a source of strength? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I never thought I'd be here, living alone on this quiet, sprawling Montana ranch with only the cattle, horses, and an endless stretch of open land around me. The place can feel so empty sometimes, especially since Jacob left for his latest tour. It's been nearly a year now, and while I'm proud of him, every day feels longer, heavier. Jacob left me with Ranger, his parting gift and, I suspect, his attempt to ease the ache he knew I'd feel. Ranger is a sturdy border collie with an intelligent gaze, and I'm grateful for him. But at first, he was just a dog, a gentle creature to keep the animals in line and to give me someone to talk to during those late, lonesome nights. I didn't expect him to become my shadow, my constant, my friend. Days on the ranch are repetitive. Every morning I rise before dawn, Ranger beside me, his tail wagging in that silent, unspoken greeting. We head out to check the horses and feed the cattle, Ranger weaving skillfully among them, guiding them with the same instinct Jacob must have seen when he chose him for me. Sometimes I find myself talking to him, sharing bits of my thoughts as if he understands. And in his own way, maybe he does. Ranger seems to know when I'm missing Jacob most. He'll nudge his head under my hand or lie quietly by my side, just close enough to remind me I'm not alone. I know he's only a dog, but on days like today, he feels like something more. Have you ever had a pet who seemed to know exactly what you needed without a single word? Today, I'm continuing my story about Ranger and me, because sometimes the quietest friendships speak the loudest. Share your experiences with me in the comments. It was a quiet, chilly night when I truly understood the depth of Ranger's loyalty. I'd spent the day working hard, repairing fences and mending the barn, my hands numb from the biting wind. All day, memories of Jacob kept flooding back unbidden, each one sharper than the last. Sometimes I try to keep them at bay, to push through each day without letting myself sink too deeply into the loneliness. But that night I couldn't. After finishing up, I sank onto the porch steps, the ache in my chest heavier than ever. I guess Ranger sensed it. He seemed to sense everything. He trotted over, settled beside me, and simply rested his head on my lap. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt like he understood exactly what I was feeling. As I sat there staring out at the quiet landscape, I found myself speaking, almost without realizing it. I told Ranger things I hadn't shared with anyone, not even Jacob, about how hard it was to get out of bed some mornings, how each sunrise felt like just another reminder of another day alone. Ranger's presence was constant, a soft, silent strength beside me. His fur was warm and comforting beneath my hand, and I felt a kind of calm settle over me. That night something changed. I no longer saw Ranger as just a pet or a watchful guardian of the farm. He became a true companion, someone or maybe something I could lean on. There was a quiet understanding between us, a bond that words couldn't explain. Ranger had filled a place in my heart I hadn't realized was so empty. Sometimes we don't realize how much we need someone or something until we're truly alone. Today, Ranger's quiet loyalty brings a kind of comfort words can't offer. Have you ever shared a silent, unspoken understanding with your pet? The days passed, blending together like strokes on a weathered canvas. Each morning brought its routine, feeding the cattle, tending the horses, repairing parts of the old barn, tasks that used to be Jacob's. Ranger was always there, shadowing my every step. It was as though he had taken on Jacob's role in his own way, making sure I was never out of his sight. One morning, I woke up feeling particularly alone. It was one of those mornings where you feel the weight of every memory, every promise, every moment of waiting. I tried to shake it off, to brush it away like dust, but the feeling clung to me. I grabbed my boots and Ranger, hoping that some work around the ranch would distract me. As I was clearing out an old shed, though, my foot slipped and I stumbled backward, hitting my knee on a heavy crate. The pain shot through me, sharp and immediate, bringing a wave of frustration and anger with it. It wasn't just the pain of the fall, it was everything. The loneliness, the silence, the feeling of doing all this on my own. Tears pricked my eyes and I cursed under my breath, feeling ridiculous for falling apart over something so small. Before I could stand up, Ranger was there. He circled around me, his worried eyes meeting mine, as if asking if I was all right. He nudged me gently, pressing his nose against my hand, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I sat down on the ground, leaning against the wall, and let him sit beside me, his steady presence a balm for my frayed nerves. I ran my fingers through his soft fur, the rhythm of it soothing, grounding. Ranger leaned into me, his warmth seeping through the coolness of the morning air. He didn't try to fix anything. He was just there. And in that simple act, I felt a level of understanding that was hard to put into words. That day, I realized Ranger was more than just a pet. He was my partner on this ranch, my silent guardian, my friend. Through the days that followed, we worked side by side, each moment reinforcing the bond between us. I didn't feel quite so alone anymore. Knowing he was there, watching over me, understanding me in ways no one else could. A few weeks after that quiet morning with Ranger, I got a call from my old friend Claire. She and her husband Tom were passing through on their way to visit family. I hadn't seen them in ages, and the thought of company was exciting, even if a bit intimidating. Life on the ranch had become such a solitary rhythm, with Ranger as my only companion, that I had almost forgotten what it was like to have people around. They arrived in the late afternoon, their car kicking up dust as they pulled into the driveway. I went out to greet them, feeling a surge of joy at seeing Claire's familiar smile and the warmth in her hug. Tom was just as friendly, wrapping me in a big embrace, his energy filling the quiet space of the ranch like sunlight pouring into a dark room. Ranger trotted up, curious and cautious. Tom knelt down to pet him, and Ranger seemed to approve, wagging his tail in greeting. It was a strange feeling, having other voices echo through the house, laughter filling rooms that had been silent for so long. As the evening wore on, we sat on the porch, talking about old memories and sharing stories. Claire and Tom had a natural ease with each other, one that only years of love and companionship could bring. The way Tom reached over to tuck a stray strand of hair behind Claire's ear, the way she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, the glances they shared. It was the kind of quiet intimacy that spoke volumes. Watching them together stirred something deep within me. A longing, an ache, a reminder of the love I once had so close. Seeing them brought back memories of Jacob, of the way he used to wrap his arms around me, making me feel safe and cherished. But now all I had were memories and Ranger. As the days passed, I found myself withdrawing a bit. I watched Claire and Tom as they moved through the house, preparing meals together, sharing whispered jokes that made Claire laugh in that way only he could. Their happiness, so effortless and natural, was a beautiful thing. But it also made the empty spaces in my life feel larger, the silence heavier. Ranger, as always, seemed to sense my mood. He stayed closer to me, almost like he knew that their presence, as comforting as it was, also brought a shadow of sadness. One evening, after watching Claire and Tom dance slowly in the living room to a song playing on the old record player, I slipped away to the barn. I couldn't watch anymore. The loneliness was too sharp, the memories too close. I sat down on a bale of hay, burying my face in my hands, trying to keep the tears at bay. Before long, I felt Ranger's warm presence beside me. He nudged my arm, pressing his head into my lap, his eyes full of that same unspoken understanding. "You're all I have right now, aren't you, Ranger?" I whispered, my voice breaking. He sat quietly beside me, his warmth steady, his loyalty unwavering. In that moment, I realized that while I might be without Jacob, I wasn't completely alone. Ranger was there, filling the space in my heart that longed for connection, giving me a kind of companionship I hadn't thought possible. Later that night, I returned to the house, hoping that some quiet time out by the barn had settled my thoughts. The house was dimly lit, and I felt a comfort in the stillness. But as I walked through the hall, heading toward my room, a soft murmur caught my attention. I glanced into the living room, where I saw Claire and Tom close together on the couch, wrapped in each other's embrace. They were unaware of my presence, lost in each other's company. Tom's hand gently brushed against Claire's shoulder as he leaned in close, their laughter quieting to a tender silence. I could see the affection in every small touch, in the way he held her, his arm drawing her in as though nothing else mattered. They shared a closeness so natural and so deep that it almost felt like I was intruding on something sacred. I pulled back, not wanting to interrupt, but the scene lingered in my mind as I walked down the hall. It was a bittersweet reminder of what I missed most. Those quiet moments of affection, the warmth of being held by someone who knew every part of you. the comfort of love's simple presence. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts swirling with memories of Jacob. Ranger padded over, his watchful eyes full of understanding. I reached down to rest my hand on his head, letting his warmth ground me. In the quiet, I allowed myself to feel the ache, to accept the longing that I had tried so hard to keep at bay. Ranger settled beside me, a calm and constant presence. I felt a sense of gratitude for him, for the way he seemed to know exactly when I needed someone near. Though I was alone in so many ways, his quiet loyalty reminded me that I wasn't entirely without companionship. The next day, Claire and Tom's, they insisted on taking me to a special spot just a little ways off. As Claire put it, a glint of excitement in her eye. I didn't ask too many questions, even though I could tell they were up to something. I hadn't shared with them that my birthday was coming up, but something about their hushed voices and knowing glances made me feel they might have guessed. The drive was short, winding through quiet country roads and past golden fields under a bright blue sky. Ranger sat content in the back seat, his head poking out the window, ears flapping in the wind. His happiness was contagious, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of excitement building up inside me too. We arrived at a quiet clearing nestled beside a small sparkling lake, surrounded by tall pines and wildflowers. The place was serene, a hidden gem I hadn't known about all this time despite living so close. Tom and Claire quickly got to work, unloading supplies from the car and setting up 2 tents near the lakeside. "You really thought of everything," I laughed, a warm feeling settling in as I watched them fuss over the little details, setting up a small grill, unrolling blankets, even stringing a few lights between the trees as the sun began to dip in the sky. "Well, we weren't about to let you spend your birthday without a bit of celebration," Tom grinned, handing me a cozy blanket as we gathered around the fire he'd started. Claire was cooking up something over the grill, and soon the smell of grilled vegetables and sizzling meat filled the air. I was touched. As much as I tried to play off birthdays as just another day, their thoughtfulness made me realize how much I missed having people around who cared enough to make a fuss, however small, over me. When the food was ready, we sat around the fire, the sky above us slowly filling with stars. Claire pulled out a small bottle of wine, pouring each of us a glass, including one for herself and Tom, and a small bowl for Ranger to lap at some water. We toasted to new memories, their smiles reflecting the firelight, and for a little while, it felt as though the distance from my everyday life had somehow lifted a weight off my heart. After we ate, I sat back, watching the fire crackle as Ranger curled up beside me. Claire leaned in with a grin and pulled out a cupcake, a small candle flickering atop it. She placed it gently in front of me, her eyes warm and knowing. "Make a wish, Hannah," she said softly, her voice carrying a kindness that almost brought tears to my eyes. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the presence of my friends, the warmth of the fire, and Ranger's gentle breathing beside me. It was a simple wish, one for peace, for strength, and for the courage to continue, no matter where life led. As the fire crackled softly in the quiet of the night, a sense of calm surrounded us. Claire and Tom were laughing about a shared memory from years ago, their voices soft and familiar in the cool night air. I found myself smiling with them, grateful for the warmth of their company. But as I looked up, seeing the stars flickering high above in the endless Montana sky, a sudden wave of loneliness hit me with an intensity one hadn't expected. I glanced at my phone, a small silly hope flickering in my chest that maybe, just maybe, there'd be a message from Jacob, a call, a text, something to show he was thinking of me. But the screen remained silent, just like it had all day. The laughter around me began to blur, their voices fading as I drifted into my thoughts, memories of Jacob flooding my mind. I tried to keep it at bay, to be present, to hold on to this moment with my friends. But the ache was too strong, too deep. I felt a lump rising in my throat, my chest tightening as I tried to blink away the tears that had begun to well in my eyes. I quickly looked down, hoping neither Claire nor Tom would notice. But Ranger, ever vigilant, nudged his head into my lap, his soft eyes searching mine as though he understood. I stroked his fur, feeling a tremor in my hand as I fought to keep my composure. But the quiet, tender moment broke something inside me, and a single tear escaped, slipping down my cheek. Without thinking, I reached for the bottle of wine on the ground beside me, pouring a glass and taking a long, steadying sip. The warmth of it spread through me, dulling the sharp edge of my sorrow, if only for a moment. I took another sip, feeling the sting of each swallow match the ache in my chest. The night was beautiful, the stars vast and endless, but all I felt was the emptiness of Jacob's absence. I closed my eyes, clutching the glass tightly as I breathed in the crisp night air, letting the quiet surround me. Ranger pressed closer, his loyalty a comfort even as I felt the weight of all I'd been holding inside. As the fire died down and the stars grew brighter, Claire and Tom retreated to their tent, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The two tents were close enough that I could see their shadows moving behind the thin canvas walls. They shared quiet laughter, whispered words, and eventually, a tender embrace. They blend together. I turned away, feeling an ache build in my chest that was hard to ignore. It was a beautiful, peaceful night, one that begged to be shared with someone. I thought of Jacob, wondering where he was at that very moment, wishing more than anything that he could be here beside me. The silence pressed down on me, and the longing I'd tried so hard to bury rose up, sharper than ever. Ranger, sensing my quiet despair, moved closer, his warm body pressing against my side as if he understood. He rested his head on my lap, his soft gaze meeting mine. I reached down, running my fingers through his fur, feeling the steady comfort he offered. He licked my cheek, his gentle, unspoken assurance bringing a small measure of relief, even as a tear slipped down my face. With the warmth of the fire, the quiet presence of Ranger beside me, and the faint murmur of my friends nearby, I let myself drift. Somewhere in the haze of that moment, I closed my eyes and imagined Jacob there, holding me, his embrace easing the loneliness. It was as if, just for a moment, all the distance and time apart faded, leaving only a feeling of closeness that softened the ache in my heart. In that quiet, dreamlike state, I felt the depth of my longing and the quiet solace Ranger provided, grounding me in the here and now, even as I held onto a memory that felt so close, yet just out of reach. Sometimes the most unexpected comforts can bring us a sense of renewal and peace. Have you ever woken up feeling renewed after a night of deep emotions, finding strength in something simple or familiar? Share your stories in the comments below. I woke up slowly, my thoughts hazy and softened by the faint echo of last night's wine. For a moment I lay still, feeling the warmth surrounding me, not quite ready to open my eyes. The quiet weight of Ranger was pressed against my side, his fur a soft, comforting presence as he lay curled up in the blanket beside me. A pale, early light filtered through the walls of the tent, and I noticed the world outside was still cloaked in a gentle fog. Everything was hushed, wrapped in the peaceful stillness that only comes just before dawn. The events of the previous night felt like a distant dream, but as I took a deep breath, I realized there was something different in the air, a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. Turning to look at Ranger, I couldn't help but smile. His steady loyalty had been my anchor, his quiet presence reminding me that even in the loneliness, I was never truly alone. He lay there, peaceful and trusting, as though he'd always been there to watch over me. As I lay there, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket and the quiet, gentle morning light, I felt a renewed sense of peace. Maybe it was the closeness, maybe it was the quiet bond one shared with Ranger, or maybe it was simply the dawn of a new day, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. With a soft smile, I reached down to pat Ranger, feeling the simple joy of having him beside me. Whatever the day would bring, I knew I could face it, finding strength in the little things that had brought me through the hardest times. As the dawn brings new light, sometimes it's the simplest comforts that renew our spirit. Have you ever felt a deep connection with a pet or a friend during a tough time that brought you strength? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of quiet resilience and unexpected bonds.